Hi, I'm Pam Fox. Welcome back to my Bible study. We're streaming live on YouTube, and we're going through the book of Genesis. So give me one second. Oops. A little bit different setup today. So there we go. Put that right there. And we'll get started. So last week we left off in chapter 33. And let's just do a bit of a review before we get into chapter 34. So we're still in the life of Jacob. Last week we saw him reunite with his twin brother Esau. We saw him really fearing Esau because he had ripped him off 20 years earlier by stealing, by trading a bowl of soup for the birthright, and then later by tricking him out of the blessing from his ailing father. So he went away for 20 years. Now he's back, and he knows Esau is coming to meet him. And so he really humbles himself. And one thing I really want to kind of focus on today is this idea: when we study the Bible, we need to remember that these accounts and these stories, they're accounts of things that happen. They're stories of these Hebrew people, the original people of the Jewish nation. And, they were humans. They did things. That they made good choices. They made bad choices. They were faithful to God. They were unfaithful to God, just like you and me. And we see how that played out, how that worked out for them. And today we're going to see this story of Dinah, the one daughter of Jacob that's mentioned, and what happens to her. But last time we saw Jacob reuniting with his twin brother Esau, and he was really wanting to find favor. Well, he wanted to survive, right? He feared that Esau was coming to kill him. And he knew he was guilty of what he had done. And so he really approached his brother with a stature of humility. And he approached him with the attitude of, "You are my Lord and I am your servant." And he approached him with the outward expression of a sacrifice. Remember, he sent on the gift before him. He gave up a great portion of his wealth to give to his brother. And so all of these things are examples of humility and of repentance and of sacrifice and of love. Really, he wanted to reconcile with his brother. He wanted to be at peace with his brother. And so he knew that, foundationally speaking, in order to achieve any of that, he had to humble himself. He had to repent, which means, I admit it, I'm guilty, I'm sorry, I did it, I'm guilty. And he had to ask for his brother's grace. And remember, grace means unmerited favor, or it means undeserved mercy. So he was asking his brother Esau for that undeserved mercy. He admits, I'm guilty, I did it, I'm sorry, but I'm seeking your grace, your unmerited favor. And that's what happened. And we saw last time that when Esau and Jacob came together, Jacob was down on the ground, just bowing before Esau. And Esau was like, "Come here, let me give you a big fat hug." I mean, he wanted to reconcile. And there's a lot of questions that came out of the last chapter, at least in my estimation. And that's always the case as far as I'm concerned. And today there's going to be a lot of questions that come out of chapter 34. I'm going to give a quick, so last time, that was about it. They reconciled. Jacob was very humble. He was very repentant. Esau forgave him, and they went on their merry way. This week in chapter 34, we have this story of Dinah. And she was the only daughter that's mentioned of Jacob. Remember, he's got 11 sons at this point. Last time we saw them, they were just little kids when he took them off to the side to protect them. They were just little kids. They were all under the age, what did we decide? All under the age of 13. Now we're going to see that they're grown men in today's chapter, because we're going to see them commit some really serious acts of violence, at least two of them. And Dinah, she was one of the younger of the boys. So she at this point in the story, she might have been 13, 14, 15, somewhere around there. She was a very young woman. Um, and basically the story says that she was defiled. That was she was the you'll see the verbiage was he took her, which is a word that's meant to be, to seize or to take by force. So most Christians really interpret this chapter as meaning that Dinah was raped. I don't know that that's the case. It's not exactly what it says. It does say that she was defiled, but to consummate a relationship outside of wedlock would have been defiling. Um, it doesn't say that, she did or didn't give consent. In fact, really, we don't really see Dinah's perspective in this chapter at all. We see the perspective of her brothers. So basically, she was maybe raped, maybe not raped, but she was defiled. For certain, it says she was defiled by this man, Shechem. And Shechem was a prince in a Hivite or a Hivite land, which, if you remember back in chapter 10 of Genesis, we saw the Hivites. They were descendants of Ham and Canaan. So they weren't necessarily God-fearing people. They weren't these sons of Jacob were people who God had set aside to be his chosen people, who he directly communicated with and taught them how to live, right? He went into covenant with them. I will be your God. You will be my people, which means you'll be obedient to me, to my ways, to my laws. So everyone else, including these Hivites, they would have had their own gods, their own customs. They weren't, they were different in that aspect. They weren't considered godly people the way God's chosen people were supposed to be considered godly people. And of course, God's chosen people weren't necessarily godly either. We're going to see that today, because they were human. They were human. And that's what I was talking about before, is when we're studying the Bible, we do need to remember that these are humans. Even though Jacob and his sons were chosen by God to be his chosen, set apart people, to build a nation, to be a light on a hill that would attract other people to God. That was the intention. But we'll see as we go through the Bible and we study these people that time and time again, they were unfaithful, right? That they were unfaithful to God, which is to say, when you're unfaithful to your husband, for example, it means that you're messing around with other men. These people were supposed to be faithful to their God, and they were worshiping other gods. And we're going to see that in today's chapter, especially in next week's chapter. But that's kind of the gist of it. And basically what happens is when Dinah's brothers find out what happened to her, their anger and their rage consumes them. And instead of trying to take a bad situation and make the best of it, which I'm not trying to make little of rape, but the Hebrew people were instructed by God that the whole idea, we'll see it later in Leviticus, of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We're going to see two of the sons of Jacob in today's chapter really overcompensate. They're going to forget about the idea of eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and they are going to take matters into their own hands, and they are going to slay an entire nation of people because of this incident, because of this defiling of their sister. And this is what I mean about there's a lot of questions that come up when it comes to this story, and they go unanswered for the most part. And so what it's for you and me, it's up to us to really look at these stories, these accounts in the Bible where there's a lot of questions. And instead of focusing on, we can ask those questions and we can even look for the answers and we can ask God, well, what about this and what about that? But there's a lot here that we can look at and that we can glean from, that we can use for application in our own lives. And I think the primary thing here in this week's chapter, in last week's chapter, is this idea that in order for us to really move forward in life and grow, there has to be that foundational level of humility, of repentance, of sacrifice, of obedience, and of love, right? Unto each other and especially unto God. And that's what we're going to see. It's what we saw last week. And it's kind of what we can glean from this week as well, at least in terms of when we look at the decisions that these brothers made compared to maybe a better decision that they could have made in terms of humility and repentance and sacrifice and forgiveness and faithfulness to each other and to God and love. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm in the King James Version. And by the way, if you want to read this chapter in the message version, it might make a lot more sense, but I'm going to go ahead and read it in the King James Version, and we'll just stop and kind of look at some of these different words. Glasses. So, chapter 34, verse 1. Here we go. And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. So, this is just saying that Dinah was going out to visit some other girlfriends, right? So she went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, I scoot back a little bit. I can get a little sweet spot here. Okay, and when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. So this is where most Christians interpret this idea that Dinah was raped by Shechem. So let's look at this a little bit. First of all, we have this Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite. Again, the Hivites were the descendants of Ham and Canaan. Remember, Ham was one of the three sons that came out of the ark. This is one of the sons of Noah. And he was the son that received, the curse. Well, the curse was through Canaan. So we have these Hivites there, and we have the prince, which is Shechem, and his father, the king, which is Hamor. And it says that this Shechem took Dinah. It says he took her. That he says he saw her and he took her. So that word "took," when we look it up in the Strongs, it means to seize or to take by force. And this is where people get the idea, and also from that the word that comes later, the word "defiled," that he raped her. And again, when I read this, I don't know for certain that that's the case. It could be, or it could have been two people that, did something that was against certainly her custom. It probably wasn't, to just have sex with a woman probably wasn't against his custom. It doesn't say, but it was certainly against her custom. A marriage was consummated. The sex took place on the night of their wedding. And so could it have been rape? Yeah, it could have very well could have been. It might not have been. It might have been something a little bit different. That's not necessarily important. What's important is, it's important, obviously, but we don't know any more details. So we just kind of have to look at it and say, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. Okay, so verse 3, it says, and his soul, this is talking about Shechem, and his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. And he loved the damsel and spake kindly unto the damsel. So maybe he did rape her, but in this next verse, we see that he loved her. So there was a inappropriate action in terms of him having sex with her, but it says that he did love her. Okay. And I'm not trying to make excuses for him. I'm just trying to understand the story here as best as we can. So it says his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel and spake kindly unto her. And verse 4, it says, and Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, get me the damsel to wife. So traditionally speaking, the custom of these people was for marriages primarily to be arranged. Families would arrange for their children to be married. It's like, yeah, I like this one, and they would come together, and there would be some sort of an agreement, like what's in it for our family, what's in it for your family. A woman would usually have a price or a dowry, like if she was really beautiful and came from a wealthy family, she would cost more. And so we have to understand the context here of what's happening. Shechem goes to his father, the king, and says, I want to marry her. I love her. I want to marry her. Make it happen. Arrange this marriage. Verse 5, and Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. So now the word is getting back to Jacob, which would have been really common. No matter, you could have lived kingdoms away, and the rumor mill was huge because they didn't live like we live today. Like we have mass communication today, but we're very preoccupied, right, with our lives. And yes, we gossip, and yes, there's a rumor mill, obviously, but there was back then too, because um, sharing information was a big deal, and it would travel quickly, right, just from person to person to person. And the idea was to get the message back to a specific person, right? And here, that specific person was the father of Dinah. The rumor mill wants to get the message back to Jacob that his daughter has been defiled by Shechem. So it says, and Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. Now, for me, this opens up so many questions, because we see Jacob hear his word that his daughter was defiled, and we see nothing about his emotions, his reaction, what he thought. We just see him say that his sons were with the cattle in the field, they were out working, and it says that he held his peace until they came home, which is to say, he wanted to tell his sons. He wanted to give them the bad news. He probably knew that they would react with a lot of anger and rage, because he knew his sons. Dinah was the only daughter in the household, so maybe she was the little princess of the family. I mean, not that she would have to be in order for them to care. I'm not saying that, but I'm just trying to understand the situation here. He didn't send message to his sons of what happened. He kept his peace. He kept it quiet until he could tell them face to face. But we have nothing in terms of Jacob's reaction. Now, later, when Jacob gets word, several chapters ahead in Genesis, when he gets word that Joseph had died, we do see his reaction. We see him intensely grieving over the death of Jacob. And of course, Jacob didn't really die. He just got word through the rumor mill that he died. Well, his sons came home and told him basically that he had died, to cover up the fact that that the brothers sold him into slavery. We're going to see that later. But the point is that in that account, we do see Jacob's reaction to something horrible happening to one of his children. We see him intensely grieving over that. But here with Dinah, we don't see his reaction. We just see him keeping his peace. So let's go on, verse 6. And Hamor, this is the king of this land, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune with him. So now the fathers are going to have a talk. Hamor wants to arrange this marriage for his son because he loves Dinah. So he goes to Jacob to talk. Okay. Verse 7, and the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it. Now, again, this is an example of the Hebraic style of writing. You and I would read this and interpret it chronologically or linearly, that they heard the news and they came home. Let's read it again. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it. So, right, you would interpret that they came home because they heard it. But that's not necessarily the case. It's actually what it's saying is they came home and then they heard the news. We'll read it one more time. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved. So here with the sons, we do see their reaction and we do know their emotion. And it obviously it's a natural reaction. You hear that your daughter has been defiled, whether it was actual rape or if it was simply a consummation or sex outside of marriage. Either of those would have been considered a defilement in the eyes of these men about their sister Dinah. It says that they were grieved. Now, this is the second time that the word grieved is used in the Bible. The first time we saw the word grieved was earlier in the book of Genesis, and it was regarding God, and it was regarding humanity before the flood, and in terms of how bad humanity had become, right? Remember, it said that their thoughts were only evil continually, all the time. The thoughts of humans were evil all the time, just evil, evil, evil. And this grieved God. This grieved him. And so now we see this word for the second time in the Bible, and it's being used to describe the emotions of these brothers when they hear that their only sister, has been defiled. Okay, it says that they were, and the men were grieved. And it says, and they were very wroth. Let's look up that word wroth in verse 7. In the Hebrew, the word wrath is kara, and it means to blaze up, to glow or grow warm, of anger, zeal, jealousy, to be angry, to burn, to be displeased, to fret oneself, to grieve, to wax hot, which means to grow hot, like to be enraged. If you've ever like gotten really, really angry, you can kind of maybe empathize with that feeling of just like, you just feel like there's smoke coming out of your ears. You're so mad. It says to kindle. Oops, I lost it. To be wroth. Okay, so they were mad. They were really, really mad. They were grieved and they were mad. Okay, so let's read it one more time. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. So again, here we have a lying with Jacob's daughter, which means Dinah had sex with this man, a thing which ought not to be done. Again, rape was considered a sin, but a sex outside of a consummated or sex outside of marriage was considered a sin as well. So let's move on. Verse 8. And Hamor communed with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you give him to wife. So here Hamor is trying to arrange this marriage. He's there with Jacob. He's there with the brothers. There's no mention of Dinah being present here, which I'm curious about. I'm very curious about that. Where is Dinah in all of this? So Hamor communed with him and said, the soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. Shechem wants to marry Dinah. He says, I pray you give him to wife, and make ye marriages with us. So let's stop for a minute. So here Hamor is trying to arrange this marriage. Shechem has come to him and said, I need you to arrange this marriage. I love this woman. She belongs to this other nation, this Jewish nation. This, remember Jacob, he was renamed Israel, and they were building this Israelite nation. Yes, there's only 11 sons at this point, but they had a huge amount of wealth and many people in their household. They were a community of people. And Shechem is saying, I want to marry Dinah. Make it happen, Father, King of the land. I want to marry this woman. And so Hamor goes to Jacob to arrange this marriage. And it sounds pretty legit, like he's trying to take this bad situation and make something good of it, right? Yeah, the kids did this thing that's wrong in your eyes, but let's get them together. Let's get them married. Your daughter will be a princess. She's going to marry the prince of the land. So it almost seems like he's trying to make good out of this. Of course, we don't know. We can't know his intentions. As we move on, we start to get an idea of the king's intentions, because we're going to see him start to talk about more than just, let's get these kids married. He's going to go on to talk about this idea of merging the two kingdoms, right? Jacob's kingdom and Hamor's kingdom, to increase his numbers, which was something that would be commonly done, right? Kingdoms merging because there's more strength in numbers. So you would see another kingdom where maybe they had young, strong men, which was the case of Jacob's kingdom, where they have a lot of wealth, which was the case of Jacob's kingdom. And now my son loves your daughter. Let's get these two together and let's merge our kingdoms, which is what we're going to see next. So he says in verse 9, he says, and make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you. So he's proposing this merging of the two kingdoms. It's not just about this marriage. He's talking about a merger. Verse 10, and ye shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade ye therein, and get you possessions therein. So he's telling Jacob, you're going to marry our daughters. We're going to marry your daughters. You're going to live in our land. You're going to work in our land. You're going to trade in our land. You're going to build your wealth in our land. We're going to live together. We're going to merge. We're going to become one. And of course, the problem with this is that God was trying to establish a covenant with the people that he chose unto himself to set apart from everyone else. Again, he wanted his people to be that beacon on the hill where people would be attracted to them and want to know their God. He didn't want them to start intermarrying with other ungodly people and worshiping their idols. God didn't want his people to be unfaithful to him right? And I know that a lot of times, if you're kind of new to the Christian faith, that can sound very conceited. I know that I used to have an issue with this idea is like, well, why does God like need so much like worship and validation and all of these things? And again, I think it's really helpful, at least for me, to think about it in terms of a parent-child relationship. If you've ever been a parent before, or even if you're not, just imagine what it's like to have children who one day are disobedient to you, and then all of the consequences that come out of that, as opposed to children who are who are obedient to you, and the positive consequences that come out of that. I was thinking this morning of just a really simple example. If you had a child and all week, you're like, you need to study for your test, go study. You got that test on Friday or whatever. Maybe it's a math test or whatever. Okay, so the kid goes to their room, and every night you remind them, you need to go spend some time studying for that big test. Okay, I got to go study for my test. And they go to their room. And then they come to you a week later and say, I failed that test. And you're like, well, how can that be? You studied and you were prepared and all of that. And the child says, well, actually, I never studied. I went to my room and I played video games, or I read comic books or whatever. And so there was that level of disobedience, right? But had the child had a level of humility and of obedience and faithfulness and honor to his parents, then he would have gone to his room and studied, and he would have passed the test. And so the parent wants what's best for the child. And in today's society, we know that if children do well in school, they do better in life, right? If they do poor in school, they're less likely to do well in life. It's not a given, but statistically speaking, when we do well in school, we do better in life. And when we do poorly in school, we have a higher risk of not doing well in life. And so when we want what's best for our children, we tell them to, go study for that test or whatever. And so then when we have a breakdown in that and we have a rebellion against the parents, then there can be some negative consequences to that. Okay. And so when it comes to God, it's the same thing. He's our loving Father. He wants what's best for us. And he tells us what to do, and we're supposed to be faithful. And it all goes back to that covenant where God said, I will be your God and you will be my people, which is a really simplified way of saying, I am going to take care of you, provide for your needs, guide you, bless you, and you are going to be my people, which means something. It means you're going to be faithful to me. You're not going to go worship other gods. You're not going to rebel against me and go against the commandments that I've given you, the ways that I've taught you how to live, right? And so this idea of this covenant or this God-child relationship is really where God wants what's best for his children, and his children understand that, and out of love and faithfulness, they obey their God. Okay, so getting back to this story, we have, let's get down to verse 10. Hamor is trying to merge these two communities, bring Jacob and his people into the Hivite nation, which means they would start to marry their daughters and worship their gods. Okay, so this is a bad idea. So let's see what happens. Verse 11. And Shechem said unto her father and unto her brethren, again, we don't know where Dinah is in all of this, but Shechem is there, and he says, let me find grace in your eyes, and what ye shall say unto me I will give. In other words, remember that a female would have had a price on her in terms of becoming a wife. It was called a dowry. And he's basically saying, name your price and I'll pay it. Whatever it is, I'll pay it. That's how much he loves her and how much he wants to marry her. And I don't think that Shechem is concerned about this whole merger like his father is. He just wants to marry Dinah. They're young and in love. He wants to marry her. That's the way I see it anyway. It's what it looks like. He says, name your price and I'll give it. I'll pay it. Verse 12. He says, ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as ye shall say unto me, but give me the damsel to wife. He's saying, name your price. I will pay it. I want to marry Dinah. Verse 13. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, and said, because he has defiled Dinah, their sister. Now we're going to go on and read what they say, but remember that word deceitfully. So everything I'm about to read, everything that these brothers are about to say is a lie. They have no intention on fulfilling any of it. It's all a lie. They're still raging hot, mad over what happened to Dinah, and they want vengeance. They want vengeance. So one more time, and the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully and said, because he has defiled Dinah, their sister, and they said unto him, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. So basically they're saying, you want to marry our sister Dinah, but you're a bunch of heathens. You're a bunch of filthy, disgusting, uncircumcised heathens. So there's no way we can give her to you because of that. Again, they're setting this up because they have a plan. They have a plan, and you're going to see what it is here in a minute. But they're basically saying, you can't marry our daughter because you're filthy, disgusting heathens and you're uncircumcised. Remember, they considered themselves people of God, and part of that meant, out of their obedience to God, that the males were circumcised. That was their custom, and that was an outward expression that they belonged to God. That was a physical outward mark that they had removed their foreskin, that they were God's chosen people, right? I don't want to say Jewish because they haven't really formed the Jewish nation as of yet. They're just in the infancy of it, though. And circumcision is a part of their custom at this period. If you've been following along, we saw that a few chapters back, where God basically instructed them, you're my people, and this is what you're going to do. The men will be circumcised so that you'll look different. You'll be set apart. And it would be an outward expression of something that takes place in the heart, or is supposed to take place in the heart, which is faithfulness to one God. So they say, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. But in this will we consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. So they're basically saying, you can't marry our sister because you're filthy and uncircumcised. But if you guys all want to get circumcised, basically, if you want to convert and be like us, then you can marry our sister. Okay, remember though, they're lying, and there's more to the plan. Verse 16, they go on. Then we will give you our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters unto us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. So they're basically giving them a way that we can agree to the marriage and the merger. All your men have to be circumcised. That's the way. Verse 17, but if ye will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone. In other words, if all the men in your country don't get circumcised, we're taking Dinah and we're leaving. Okay. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. So they get through hearing all of this from Jacob's sons, and they basically say, yeah, sounds good to us. So, which I find comical, obviously. They're basically saying, if all the men in the country are circumcised, then we can make this merger and this marriage happen. And they're like, okay, fine, we'll do that. Which really tells you, one, how much Shechem loves Dinah and how much Hamor wants this merger. And it tells you how wealthy that Jacob must be and how appealing his young, strong sons must be. They want to intermarry with the daughters of these sons. Okay. So it says their words pleased Hamor and Shechem. And verse 19, it says, and the young men deferred not to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. So it's talking about the young man. It's talking about Shechem. It says he deferred not to do the thing, which means he agreed to do the thing. He agreed to get circumcised because he said he had delight in Jacob's daughter. He loved her. And it says, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father, which is interesting to me. It's basically saying that it's saying that the men of his father's house are extremely dishonorable, because if this man did rape Dinah, he's obviously not an honorable man. Which, there's a lot to that. We could really dive deep into that, but I'm not going to. But it says he was more honorable than the house of his father, which to me says, maybe he didn't rape this woman. Maybe it was consensual. And again, We don't know for sure. But it says he was more honorable than all the house of his father. So that could mean a couple of different things there. But we're going to keep going. Verse 20. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came unto the gate of their city and communed with the men of their city, saying, These men are peaceable with us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade therein, for the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives. And of course, they don't have any daughters at this point. There's no mention that they even have wives. But they're young, virile men, strong men. So it says, let us take their daughters for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised, as they are circumcised. So basically, they go to the men there in the city and they say, look, we have an opportunity here to merge with this clan, but there's one condition. We all have to be circumcised. Okay, let's see. What do the guys say? Verse 23. Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us. And Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all that went out of the gate of his city, and every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of the city. So I don't really know what this would look like. It says every man that went out of the gate. I don't know if they set up like a circumcision tent there at the gate of the city. And anytime a man came out, it'd be like, oh, have you gotten your circumcision yet? Let's do it. Let's do it right here. And the men agreed to it because they wanted to have this merger with this strong, wealthy clan of people. Verse 25. And it came to pass on the third day when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword and came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. Okay. So here we have, again, they're enraged. They came up with this plan. I don't know if it was just Simeon and Levi. They're the only ones that are mentioned that took their swords and went in and slew everyone there. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe that two men could kill everybody, but this was their plan. They knew that on day 3 that these men would be very sore, that infection quite possibly could be setting in, which would make them tired and resting and recovering from their circumcision. And that's when they went in and they killed them all. Okay. It says they went in boldly and slew all the males. Verse 26. And they slew Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. So Dinah was there with Shechem. I mean, it doesn't say that they were married. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. It doesn't say how much time had passed since they made this agreement. I mean, yeah, it says 3 days have passed, but it doesn't say when they started instituting this circumcision. Maybe they got married. She was there in the household. She was with him. Maybe she was a captive and this was their way to free her. I mean, I really don't know. That's one theory, that she had been taken captive, being held by this family. And the brothers just said, no, nuh-uh. Let's figure out a way we can go in and rescue her. Or she might have been in love with Shechem and she was excited. She was going to get married. Her two families were going to demonstrate forgiveness and move on from this thing that she did. She was going to become a princess and live with the man that she loved. I mean, it could go a couple different ways. We don't know. At least at this point in the story, we don't know. So they grabbed Dinah and they left. Verse 27, and the sons of Jacob came unto the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. So not only are they mad at Shechem, they want to take vengeance on the whole city for this defiling that took place. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about overcompensation. God in the Old Testament in Leviticus, he talks about vengeance. He says, vengeance belongs to me. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And he talks about how his people are to deal with being with being oppressed, or with being, having a crime committed against them, that the punishment should fit the crime, rather, right? That whole idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, that comes from Leviticus. And so here we have a defiling that takes place, and we have two fathers trying to come together and really try to find a way to move forward peaceably and to make the best of a bad situation, right? But these brothers say, no, we're taking matters into our own hands, and we're going to kill all the men in this city, where Shechem is from. We're going to kill them all. And that's the plan that they devised, because they said, yeah, you can marry her if you all get circumcised. They knew that on day 3, their guard would be down. They would be weak and tired and sore and recovering. And that's when they went in. And it says just the two of them went in. They would have been resting, and they just would have just barged into their households with the sword and just slay, 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 slay. I mean, it just would have been a horrible, gruesome. I mean, for all we know, these two men, at least in terms of what we've read so far in the Bible, we don't see any other account up to this point that these men have killed another man before, that they've ever, committed murder. And here they have no trouble. They're so enraged by their anger that they go in, these two men, and just start killing every man in sight. But there's more. It says that the sons, the other brothers, now, after they killed everybody, they come into the city, and they, what's the word? It says, and spoiled the city. So to spoil a city is when you go in after a battle, you take the jewelry, pottery, and anything of value. You take it. It now belongs to you. That includes the livestock, and it includes the people. So the women and children, who presumably would have been grieving and wailing and mourning there in the city because someone just came in and killed all their men, right? The mothers would have been grieving, the wives would have been grieving, the children would have been grieving. And now these sons, who they were told were peaceful men, who were told by their king they were going to, enter into a merger, they've come in and they've tricked their men and now killed their men, and they're grieving. And now they're coming in and taking everything, including the women and children, to become either wives of these men, these sons of Jacob, or slaves. Just horrific, horrible, horrifying. And again, it's really important when we study the Bible to not have an attitude that, oh, it's in the Bible. Well, this horrible thing is in the Bible. Therefore, God is horrible and the Bible is horrible. I used to be guilty of that. These stories are meant to teach us something. We need to dive deep into them and find they're a historical, documented account of something that happened. But you and I can go into these stories and we can learn from these stories, right? Have you ever heard the saying, like, learn from other people's mistakes, right? You can either go through a hardship yourself and learn, which is the way most of us learn. That's just life. But we can watch other people and learn from their mistakes too. And here we see these men enraged by their hatred. And instead of trying to move forward in a peaceful, harmonious, effective manner, they take matters into their own hands, and they allow their rage and their hatred and their anger guide them, which isn't what God has taught them. It's not what God has taught them, but it's what they choose to do. All right, so it says they spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. And they have that word they there. They had defiled their sister. They didn't defile Dinah. Shechem defiled Dinah. But they're taking it out on everybody in the entire city. That's how possessed they are by their own anger. Which is understandable. I'm not saying, I get it. In fact, there's a certain degree of admiration there that these brothers were so fond of their sister that they took it upon themselves to get vengeance on her behalf. But that we don't see them asking her. We don't even see them talking to her. For all we know, she's in love with Shechem and they killed the love of her life. We don't know. Verse 28, they took their sheep and their oxen and their asses and that which was in the city and that which was in the field and all their wealth and all their little ones, their children, and their wives took they captive and spoiled even all that was in the house. So they went through the fields and the households and they took everything. It's really a picture of, ha, take that. It's a picture of revenge at the highest level. They took everything. Verse 30. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, these are the two men that went in and killed everyone, ye have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and I being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house. And they said, should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? That's their response to their father. He basically says, what have you done? He says, you've troubled me. He's very troubling. Jacob is not happy with what they've done. So, which tells you he wasn't in on it. When they said, yeah, I guess if you guys all get circumcised, Jacob was probably like, oh, okay, well, if that's what it takes and they agree to it, okay, let's do this. It sounds to me like Jacob was in favor of the marriage and he was in favor of the merger, which he shouldn't have been in favor of the merger, again, because God was calling his people to be faithful to him. And this, merging with people who worship other gods would have been a bad move. But that's not why the sons of Jacob did what they did. It wasn't out of faithfulness to God. It was out of their hatred over what happened and their anger and their rage. The idea of calming down and forgiving and finding a peaceable solution was not on the table for them. They took matters into their own hands. So now Jacob he's very angry. He wanted this merger. He wanted to have peace, which is understandable. He didn't recognize, and he should have, that by merging their two clans, it would have been bad for his people. And we're going to see that time and time again as we continue to study these people, that they would marry people outside of, people who worshiped other gods, and then they would start to worship their gods and take on their customs, of human sacrifice and these different things. But Jacob is saying, I'm few in number, and now they're going to come after me, and they're going to come after you, and they're going to kill us. So he's worried that because of what his sons have done, that they're dead men, And the response of his sons are, well, what are we supposed to do? Just let them treat Dinah like a harlot, like a whore? Is that what you want us to do? And that's where this chapter ends off. And when it going into the next chapter, 35, it kind of takes right off from there. So, and continues with this story. But we're going to stop there. And we'll continue on next time. So thank you for being here with me today. I pray God's blessing on you and on your lives. I pray that he gives you strength and a hunger and a passion to be close to him and to be faithful to him, to be in the word of God, because it's that spending time with God in the word is what really strengthens our faith. And we need a strong faith. We need a strong faith in our lives when we encounter hardship. And there's plenty of hardship in this life, right? There's plenty of hardship in the world. There's probably plenty of hardship on the horizon to come. We need faith in order to encounter that hardship, because it's in our faith, in a strong faith, is where we can say, oh God. It's where we can take our focus off of the hardship and put it on God and remember how good he's been to us, how amazing he is, how loving he is, how kind he is, how he wants the best for us. And we can put all of that in perspective and say, you know what, this is hard. And I can't believe God is allowing me to go through this. It's so hard. But God loves me. And God is going to carry me through this. And God is going to give me moments of peace and of relief through this hardship. And he might even give me moments of joy. And hopefully God will give me that day of a victory over this hardship. And we have to put our faith and our trust that that's going to happen through the power of God, not in our own strength. That's what strong faith does for you. At least it's what it's done for me. It helps me to get through those hardships with a bit of peace and with a bit of joy, with a bit of hope, right? With a focus on God and his goodness and a focus on a victory on the horizon, right? Overcoming that hardship. I have hardship in my life, which I'm sure you do too. So I pray God will strengthen your faith. I pray God will provide for your needs. I pray God will protect you from evil. There's plenty of it in this world. And I pray he will strengthen you. So until next time, thanks for watching.